Hey, what's good? It's your boy MC. Welcome to another episode of the Vocal Minority Report. I know it's been a few weeks. It's been crazy. We got some new partnerships, as I mentioned beforehand. We're elevating, Eloveate, because love is at the center of everything we do. We've got a new partnership, and because of that, I've been asked to produce a new series called She Stories. So let me tell you what She Stories is. She Stories is a storytelling platform where women come together and share their stories, build connections, and evolve their vision. These collaborative conversations cultivate deep personal exploration that compel women to express love for themselves, their work, their lives, and their communities while being candid about the challenges, pitfalls, and hardships they have had to overcome. Now, let me tell you, I don't host the show. Anasa Troutman, who was our guest on episodes 45 and 46, is the host of that show. And so she's going to be the one hosting the show, talking to the women. I produce the show, so you guys know how I get down. And that's what I've been doing, so that's why we've had some delays in getting new episodes out. And to that end, we've launched She Stories at Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah over the last week. I've been in Utah in the snow looking for black people for like 4 or 5 days now, having a great time. I actually got to meet some celebrities, got some interviews. Most everything I did out there was for She Stories. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to play a panel. We have some partners out there. We have Latino Reel, Latina Magazine. There's a organization called the Black House, which was founded about 10 years ago to be able to highlight black people, people of color, people, who don't get the same recognition at Sundance and events like those. We were lucky to partner with them. Same thing with Anna Marie Films, and just happy to be here. So here's what I want you to do. Check out this panel. It features Anasa Troutman, who again is my new business/creative partner. We've got some great things coming down the pike. Got about 4 or 5 new shows. Like, it's about to get crazy. So sit back, check out this panel. It's called A Multicultural Conversation, America's New Frontier. And initially it was supposed to be a conversation about what can we do and where are we, but it evolved from that because, that's kind of cliche. I think everyone knows where we are and how we get there. So check out this panel. Give me a couple weeks to produce a new show. Vocal Minority Report still exists. It is my baby, my first love. Stay tuned for new episodes, new content. Made a lot of great contacts. We're going to have some bigger celebrities here because your boy's out here stalking celebrities, especially at Sundance. So enjoy this episode. We'll holler at you after the show.
Previously on the Vocal Minority.
Are you part of the silent majority? Or are you part of the vocal minority?
Motherfuckers, go. Attention, please.
If America can be saved, and I don't know if it's too late, but it'll be through a radio show like this new kind.
This shit here feels like a whole entire world collapse.
The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers.
It's the vocal minority.
The revolution
We will be having a multicultural conversation regarding America's new frontier. I'd like to introduce our moderator and who I would like to grow up and be someday. Actually, she's an excellent friend of ours. She's been a supporter of Latino Reel since the very first year. Alma has brought so much to the table, so we're very thankful to her. Alma Tilghman? Is that Tilghman? I'm Anita Watson. Hey, we're Latinas, and Alma is the founder of Paper Planes Collective, which is based in Los Angeles and is a marketing and events agency. Alma works with brands and media-related nonprofits seeking to create experiences that foster diversity in entertainment and arts. So you can see why we made such a great match with Alma. Recently, Alma has partnered with CAPE, Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment, which we absolutely need representation, to produce several events highlighting the Asian market. She has worked with NALEP, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers, NCLR. So for those of you who do not know who NCLR is the National Coalition of La Raza. She actually helped to produce their well-known Alma Awards. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Furthermore, she's collaborated with Apple. This is really cool. in which she helped create the Campus Movie Fest in Mexico. Wow, that's phenomenal. And it was the first and world's largest student film festival in Mexico. She is a native Angelino, and her passion for diverse culture and experiences led Alma to Fordham University in New York City. She earned her BA in International Intercultural Studies. So without further ado, Alma and the next panel. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome. The title of today's panel is A Multicultural Conversation, part of America's New Frontier. So with that, I want to introduce our panel of three amazing speakers today. First up is Anasa Troutman. She's an accomplished writer, producer, entrepreneur, and she is the CEO of a company called Eloveate. Welcome, Anasa. Eloveate's current clients include India Reel and Reverend Seku and Holy Ghost. Next, we have Brian Walker. Brian Walker is the Culture and Entertainment Advocacy Director at Color of Change. And prior to Color of Change, Brian worked at a number of industry-leading organizations, including CAA, Participant Media, Fox, and New Line Cinema. And last but not least, we have Maria. So Maria Agui Carter, right? Maria is a writer, producer, director, she's an award-winning filmmaker as well. And so what I want to do first is I'm going to let you guys sort of tell me what you do and like some of the projects that you're currently involved in as they pertain to the multicultural conversation. We can start with you.
Sweet. Hi, everybody. So, my name is Anasa. I live in Nashville. I have a company called Eloveate. We spell Eloveate because love is at the center of everything that we do. I have been half my life in music and entertainment, and half of it in politics and organizing. And I started my company because I wanted to be able to build a model where we were taking the best of what we can do from like messaging that you get with media and combine that with the best of what we can do in terms of long-term grassroots transformation, because I think that that's how we create systemic change. And I think that the way that we also do that is through culture and art and creativity. So I always tell people if I felt like herding elephants would change the world, I would have a bunch of elephants. But I actually think that art will change the world. So that's what I do.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Walker with Color of Change. Color of Change is the largest online racial justice organization with over 1 million members strong. It was started by Man Jones in 2005. And really what we do is we build massive social action campaigns to drive real change in a variety of spaces. We hold government and corporate entities accountable in many different ways. And so I've actually come on at Color of Change in the last year, actually last January, to start a new area of the organization called the Hollywood Culture Project. And so my focus is about influencing content in Hollywood, film and television that specifically impacts Black people, Black culture, Black communities. And so I work with writers, writers' rooms, researchers, producers. We provide them with a wealth of information around different topics, from criminal justice to environmental racism to law and democracy. We specialize in many of these different areas as campaigns. So I'm going to take a lot of those resources and being able to connect those with content creators to make sure that the stories are as authentic as possible, and that they can drive enough change going forward, and that we can also change narratives about people of color and Black people specifically. So that's a lot of my work.
Well, I'm so honored to be in this multicultural brother and sisterhood on this panel. I think, can everybody hear me? I think it's really, really important that we be working together. So it's so terrific to be here with you. My name is Maria Agui Carter, and I'm a creative. I'm a maker. I'm a writer and director and a producer. I've made films for 20 years for broadcast mostly in the past. PBS is where I started. My last film is called Rebel. I've been touring on and off for 3 years with it. It won Best Historical Film in America. The last people that won that Eric Bernard Award were the Burns, the Ken Burns people
people. And so that film was about a Latina woman who fought disguised as a man in the American Civil War. And I always say that what I do is to try to bring a new kind of story. It's actually based on a real person. She's a woman that followed her husband into the Confederacy because she grew up in New Orleans, and then becomes a Union spy. And so it's based on a real person. And I like to make stories that end up being seen in the general market. So I'm always very interested in inserting a new kind of protagonist that is breaking boundaries that we haven't seen before. And so from documentaries, I've also written plays that have been produced, and now have a new screenplay that was part of the Sundance Intensive Screenwriters Lab. And I'm working with Barbara Defina, who you may know some of her work. She was Martin Scorsese's producer, and she did Goodfellas, Age of Innocence, many, many other films. So I feel like I'm beginning to enter a new world, and it's very fun.
Thank you. So I know reading a little bit of the panel description, if you guys read it earlier, it did describe something about are all communities of color currently being represented? And as we know, I think that they are being represented a little bit more than they used to. I mean, you have shows like Atlanta, you have shows like Fresh on the Boat, George Lopez show, etc. You have a movie like Hidden Figures, for example. But obviously, there's still a long way to go. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But I don't really want to talk about that. I really want us to focus on the solutions, because I think we've all heard about the problem. But I really would like to hear maybe some stories from the panel here about, a project, a challenge that you've had, how you overcame it, and, just let's focus on the positive, how you move forward. So this is for anybody, or really for all of you.
Sure. It's funny because I feel like the whole first 100 years of my career was a challenge, because I would go around talking about storytelling, talking about love, talking about the power of story, talking about the power of the individual, and literally people will be like, what? Especially because when I started my career, it was because I had a label. I was 23 years old, I started a label, Indiari was on that label, that's how we started working together. And literally we would go around to people, it was like the age of, no disrespect to them, but it was the age of Puffy and Little Kim and all that. So we would take our music around and people would be like, what's that sound? And I would be like, it's a guitar? Because they were not used to hearing young black people play live instruments, write their own songs, singing the way that the artists that we're working with were doing. And so really the way I overcame it was just by being sure I was right. It was like I had to, it took so much personal work for me to be able to persevere in my professional work, because I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. Because when you're having conversations about love, you're having conversations about diversity. I'm looking for a new word, by the way, so if anybody has any ideas, I'm open to it. When you're having those kind of conversations and you're in the entertainment industry, that's not a place that's typically open to that conversation. I mean, of course it is more now, but 20 years ago, So you really have to be sure of yourself. And you really have to surround yourself with people who are doing the work that you're doing and supporting you with the work that they're doing, so that when you go into a room and people look at you funny because they don't understand what you're talking about. When you're talking about leading with love, you're talking about creating space for everybody's story, you're talking about, connecting the power of human connection. When you don't look like them, like the most important thing, of course it needs to be good, it needs to be aesthetically pleasing, it needs to be marketable, but the real thing it needs to be is you have to be confident and sure of yourself.
I have another question for you, since you mentioned India.
Sure.
Now, I grew up in 90s hip hop, I come from hip hop, I worked Wu-Tang, Diddy, everybody. And, when India Arie first came out, she was sort of considered like this niche artist. We talked about it earlier, kind of the soul category. But then she became this Grammy Award winning actress. But that's the word that was used back then in the 90s, right? I mean, I'm not a fan of that. That's the word that was used. Yeah. And then she became like this huge Grammy Award winning artist. And I'm just wondering, how did you take her to that level? Because I'm thinking that maybe some of those lessons or some of those tips that you used to get her from, when she started to becoming this Grammy Award winning person are something lessons that maybe filmmakers can use, or maybe they can translate into, or they can apply to their projects.
Yeah, I actually think that India is a really good example of what I just said, because when she first came out, none of us expected for for that to happen. It was just like, we have a chance for you to be able to tell your stories, for you to do your music the way that you want to, and that's amazing. But what we found out was in a marketplace that was saturated with so much other stuff that we don't need to define, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like, yes, I've been looking for that, yes. And even the stories when we see Blackish and we see movies like Hidden Figures, it's like fresh air to people, because when you're longing to see yourself and to hear stories that are, we were talking earlier and you were like, we've been walking in their shoes all this time, like, when I grew up, that's all I did was go to the movies, because I'm kind of obsessed. So I'm going to the movie 2 or 3 times a week. In middle school and high school, all I'm seeing is stories of people who have nothing to do with my actual reality. You know what I mean? And so when you consume media in the way that we do, and you finally see yourself and you're finally like, oh, shoot. You know what I mean? Especially when it's somebody who looks like you, sounds like you, and then they're telling you something to help you heal yourself, to lift yourself up, to be able to liberate yourself from all the things going on in your mind. So 90% of it, for real, was like people needed it. People needed it. And people still need it. The rest of it was about authenticity. Because, India is the only artist in the pop space that not only lives those values, but actually espouses those values in her work, right? So even the other people who are like talking about spirituality or doing whatever, like their songs are not about that stuff. So the fact that she was able to find a way to like be her whole entire self all the time is really the thing that put her over the top, because people see her and they hear her and they know it's real. It's not a conversation. And so, like the conversation about authenticity in your artistry, and able to align that with your actual life, your actual person, and like who are you, and how can you have who you are come out in what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think actually leading up to where I am right now at Color of Change, my experiences have been a challenge the entire time. I worked, in the corporate organizations, working in these kind of very homogeneous office spaces, just very, I didn't see myself every day, and so constantly you run into that challenge as someone who wants to produce, and someone I got into entertainment as wanting to produce. I moved out from I went to Howard undergrad, then came out to LA. That's when I worked at New Line, and it was really about producing, writing, developing new projects, and just kind of constantly running into walls as a Black producer and a Black content creator. And during law school, a project specifically that I helped to kind of get off the ground was called A Black Actress. It was a web series with Andrea Lewis, and so that was a project where we were pitching all over the place for about a year. It was a great project, great concept, great talent connected to it, but just constantly running into challenges. And so we moved to the web. We said, this is an opportunity. YouTube and other digital spaces is really a place where you can take advantage of, as a content creator of color, and start to develop your own brand, develop your own kind of empire, more or less. We really were inspired by Issa Rae and a lot of the other folks who were coming through the path, and actually were able to then pitch Issa and get the show on Issa's channel the first season. And so Black Actress was a series that I did for a couple of years, and even right now, as a Black producer, I have like 3 independent features that I'm trying to get off the ground, and constantly running into challenges. But I think it's about really how can you do it yourself? Obviously there are a lot of disparities within the entertainment industry. That's really what my work is at Color of Change, is about breaking down those disparities. We can say that there's been an increase in presence of Black and brown content over the past few years, but in actuality, when we look at the sheer numbers, it's not. We're still seeing like 95% white representation across the board. When you compare it to like 90s time period, we had a lot of content, and in comparison, there was just not as much content coming out. Now there's so much content, so many platforms, so many things. So we see a lot of Black content, but in actuality, it's not enough. And so, that's why as an independent producer, I felt it was a need to like really put an organizer hat on, join Color of Change, and really work inside a space where I could push, whether it is, diversity, authenticity hiring, whether it is, really reshaping the narratives in different ways, and just really using my legal hat as well, but trying to affect change in different ways of not just creating the content, but actually forcing the systems that are kind of pushing content through to make changes themselves. So,
I mean, how do you do that? Like, how do you actually push the system? Maybe a situation where you've been in a studio or something, just some specific example of how you push that?
Recently, actually, I don't know if you guys heard of a show called Generation KKK. It was a show that was going to come out on A&E. It was actually supposed to come out about a week ago. They had started press on it early December, or actually late December, close to Christmas. And, we found out about it at Color of Change and immediately kind of reached out, started a conversation, and we were, in the process of trying to possibly work with them to create additional content, but, kind of discussions broke down, and really we kind of gave it partially an ultimatum where, we can create a campaign, we can uplift the campaign that's already on our site, that will really, create a lot of distraction and a lot of challenges for you to release in January. And so they decided to cancel. So that was a big win for us recently at Color of Change. In the past, we worked with, Saturday Night Live to get additional casting for Black women and for Black content creators. That's how we were able to kind of increase the diversity a couple of years ago. We were able to get Glenn back off the air a couple of years ago with a pretty large campaign. We got Cops off the air a couple of years ago with a pretty large campaign. All My Baby Mamas was another campaign that was really run by Color of Change a few years ago and kind of stopped in its tracks early on. So those are the various ways that we're kind of leveraging our constituents, our 1 million plus people, to kind of take action and show that they are dissatisfied with the content that's going to come out. And then my work, a lot of it is really about building those relationships. So after we've kind of established that they are a perpetrator of bad behavior, then how do we build solutions with them? Because they're a system that's going to continue to be in place. And so I put my producer hat on and figure out how can we work together and kind of shape the content in a way that really supports all of us as much as possible. So.
Great work, by the way. Congratulations. Maria?
Yeah, well, your question was how do you affect change? And I would say there's a couple of things. One is community. You've talked a little bit about campaigns, working with the community about campaigns. I joined as a young filmmaker a group called NALIP, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers. And for the first time, when we met the very first time, there were maybe 100 producers. It started as producers. There's nothing like it in the industry. And so soon we had directors, we had writers, we had actors, we had everyone in the industry. And it grew and grew to the point where now we're sending out, email blasts to 25,000 people in the industry. We have 800 to 1,000 people every time we do a conference. We have workshops. I joined one of the first workshops. It was a competitive process, and it was kind of like Sundance for Latinos. And it changed so much of what I considered was possible to do. I grew up undocumented in America, and I didn't become a permanent resident until my first year at Harvard. And so I've grown up silent to save my life, right? As so many of our brothers and sisters, right? 11 million right now of our brothers and sisters have no voice. And so for me, I didn't have a television. I came from Ecuador. We're a tiny country. Came to the States, grew up in New York. My mom was a factory worker. So I never assumed that I could have a voice in media. So when I entered media and began to no longer be silent and to begin to tell our stories, there's such a great power. I started in PBS. I started in local and then went on to national PBS. And I found that we could tell our stories to a larger audience of all colors. There's not enough people of color watching PBS, but that's also because PBS doesn't serve enough people of color with the programming, right? They do great children's programming. But I started that way, and WGBH was an extremely white Anglo-Saxon Protestant station. They produce, maybe 50% of what you see on national PBS across the country. And I felt like a Martian. And so that first time that I arrived at the first Nalit gathering, I saw hundreds of my peers, and we started talking about stuff that we hadn't had a chance to talk about in terms of being a person of color, making media in this larger world that is mostly run by people not like us, right? After I did that workshop, I started giving back because I was just so thankful, and it was such a powerful thing. So I eventually ended up on the board. I started a chapter in Boston where I was living, and then I joined the national board, and eventually I became the chair of the board, and now I'm a trustee. And it's been 18 years of incredible community building. That's the grassroots part. You got to have your tribe in your back pocket who have your back. Right? You've got to have that. Then you also have to have the greenlighters, and you have to create the campaigns. So Nalit is a many-legged monster because there's advocacy stuff going on, there's workshops going on, and there's the public media stuff that goes on. And so we also have exerted campaign pressures behind the scenes. So we have demanded that when the World War II Ken Burns series came out, and they were looking at Latino communities in LA, and they were looking at Texas, and they don't have one Latino veteran in like 12 hours, World War II Latino veterans, and that's where the Latino civil rights projects came out of those returning vets, right? We said, wait a minute, how can you have not found one Latino in all of that? And for a big 12-hour series, that means it's going through all kinds of channels, all kinds of people involved for many, many years to get off the ground, right? And so we started a campaign. And the NAHJ, the National Hispanic Journalists, joined the various media organizations, and they said, oh no, we can't tell an artist what to do. It's finished and it's done. And so we went around them and we started talking to the sponsors. And so really money talks. And money is also part of the way you go in to process creation, to artistry, and to running the show. Because if you look at artists, so eventually, basically, we went to the sponsors and said, look at what's happening, and the sponsors threatened to pull out. And suddenly, Ken Burns changed his mind, and he felt that he really needed to include stories of Latinos. That's just one small media campaign example. The third thing is, if we look at who is buying tickets in America, our communities are drivers, right? We're drivers in the industry. We're consumers, but we're not the makers right now at the demographic power that we should be. Latinos are 18% of the population, and we buy 25% of the movie tickets in America. We're repeat viewers. We go with our family, so we buy multiple tickets, and we buy the popcorn, And so we have a lot of power, and we need to channel that power, right? We need to be demanding. Look at Hidden Figures. Right? Incredible box office. And people would have said to you, like they did with Julie Dash's film, right? Julie Dash's film, nobody's going to watch a story about these black women, blah, 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 and she proved them wrong. And she continues to prove them wrong. Why aren't there 100 incredible Julie Dashes making films right now? It's not that the talent's not there, right? We're there.
It's actually produced by a good friend of mine, Vivi Valdez, Latina. And I think I spoke to you, Anasa, earlier. One of the questions that I did have is, when movies like Hidden Figures come out, when movies that have a predominantly black cast come out, I feel like the black community is very supportive and everybody goes out and buys tickets. But when we have a Latino film, for example, I don't know if you, Maria, if you remember the movie Spare Parts, George Lopez, it was 3 young kids who beat out MIT in a robotics competition. But hardly anybody heard about that. I mean, I don't think there were a lot of tickets sold. And we've had, McFadden, and I feel like the last big movie that we've supported might have been Selena. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what do you think maybe that we might be doing wrong? And
I can speak to that actually. I've given talks about this at the National Association of Theater Owners, who are connected to screening and distribution. And in fact, we are seeing extremely high numbers for certain kinds of content. And we know that there's so much content right now that it's noisy, right? It's hard to find that content. It's a crowded marketplace. And so giving the correct marketing and outreach budget is half the battle. We know that major films that have the right marketing budget and actually do the outreach the right way will get to their audiences. So what you see, for instance, NBC Universal is doing an incredible job, and actually their marketing and outreach is run by a Ecuadorian, and he's the vice president of marketing, and they've done Fast and Furious, right? Those millions Fast and Furious, which are multicultural casting, and you're seeing Latinos come in droves for that kind of film. They understand the Latino market. They know that unlike the white market, actually the top genre for the Latino market is horror. Right? And so, for instance, they push things like paranormal when they found that 30% of their audiences were Latino. And the next iteration of paranormal, they added a whole Latino set of storylines and characters to even capitalize on that. So we need to be savvy about understanding the industry, the market, the demographics, and how we can make those arguments to the greenlighters, because right now we are not the greenlighters. We will be, if that's coming. There's no question in my mind. However, right now we're not. So there's a disconnect right now between understanding how we are actually the drivers, right, and showing the way. And this happened very early on with advertisers and things like Univision, for instance. My cousin used to sell airtime to advertisers for these Spanish language channels. And so she had to educate them on the size of the market, right? Univision is now beating out, during sweeps, they're sometimes beating out the networks, right? And this is Spanish language television, right? And so we have an immense power. We need to just know how to tap into it. And I don't want to say just, that's not fair, because it's a complex argument, right? We need to get in the door to be able to do that, right? But we can do the research ourselves. That's available now, today, right?
Anasa or Brian, what do you think?
Well, you know what I was thinking is that I think that I don't think enough artists understand how the non-art part of this really works. You know what I mean? So like, and it is both on the commerce side, but also on the organizing side. You know, there's so many artists who are making transformative media, and they like want to see an actual social impact when they do their work, but they don't understand anything about marketing, anything about crowd building, anything about organizing, anything about campaigns. And so what you have is like a transformative piece of art that will never see the light of day. And so we need to make it more our responsibility to either learn those things or figure out who does. Because there's so many even folks who are, there's a lot of people who are making transformative media with absolutely no conversation about strategy. Not either on the commerce side or the organizing side. And it's like borderline irresponsible. You know, and like we're not at a place in time where we can just make things. You know what I mean? Like I almost don't want to say that because it makes me sad. But it's just where we are. Like if you want to see your project have impact, you gotta know what impact looks like. Not just what project looks like, but what does impact really look like and how does it happen? You know, I know of a person who wrote like an Emmy Award winning storyline about a really important social justice issue, and even went out and did the research around the content. Like, I need to talk to you to figure out how to really represent this properly, but never had one conversation with any organization that was doing that actual work to see how can my story impact your policy push? How can my story impact how you're trying to change the way that people are looking and thinking and feeling about this project? But we can't afford to do that. We can't afford to do that. We actually never could, but we can't afford it for real.
Really, especially this year.
Beautiful day.
We need an India RE song right about now.
I know a lot of them.
Brian, this next question is for you. I know that you've produced two digital series, and I'm just wondering. I mean, I don't think it's a trend. I think that's definitely the way the movement, the way programs are going in a digital direction. Do you think that for content creators of color, it's easier to get into the system? Starting on a web series, sort of like what happened with Issa Rae. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the web series that you produced? And
yeah, I mean, it's definitely the barrier to entry is much lower than going through the normal studio system or going through pitching networks and trying to get content on there. But I think it's also about just being ahead of the curve. I think we have to look ahead. Right now, the entire media landscape is changing. Everything is becoming more digital every single day, and so even the large companies, they have to figure out what their multi-platform strategy looks like, and so do independent producers of color. We have to be thinking about, we're not just writing this piece of content for, I just want it on this network, or I just want to get it on film. I want to be thinking about how am I going to exploit it potentially on Snapchat in the future? How am I going to exploit it, in other other sources or other outlets? How am I going to actually create the content? But you need to be thinking about that when you're writing the story, when you're kind of developing the entire strategy. So just becoming more aware of that. A lot of that experience, which actually pushed me towards that, was my time at Fox. Specifically, when I was at Fox, I oversaw content on mobile phones, and this was from 2008 to 2009. So I was managing all the content on Sprint, AT&T, Verizon, and it was a really transformative time period, and just entertainment in general. And I realized at that point, I couldn't follow the traditional, just become a film producer. If you want to be a producer, you got to be thinking about a business person, and how do you exploit that piece of content in all the different ways. So, that's what I think content creators need to think about more and more as they're developing their concepts, as they're kind of, bringing teams together. And then also, a big thing was I was an attorney, I'm an attorney as well. And I was in law school when Andrea Lewis, who actually created Black Actress, approached me. And, I wanted to produce as, trying to get my experience doing that. She wants to write and act. We need to be figuring out how we're building teams of people within our communities. There are a lot of folks who might want to be camera people. There are a lot of folks who might want to be, attorneys. There are a lot of folks who might want to be, designers or different things. We need to be, building those communities where we can support each other as content creators in general.
I think one little thing about community also is that we are stronger together. And so after working for many, many years at NALIB and still being very committed to Latino producers and NALIB, I started a residency for women of color. And so in our 2 years that we've run it, we had 12 women for 10 days, 6 screenwriters and 6 directors who were Native American, who were African American, who were Asian, because we share so many of the same issues. And really, if you look at America and you look at us as a bloc, we are the majority. We're not a minority, right? And so we need to also come across the color line within our own communities. And I'll have to say, some of my mentors, the best mentors I've had, Warrington Hudlin, Black Filmmaker Foundation. He found my last film. He played it at the Museum of the Moving Image as the New York premiere. He runs Black Filmmaker Foundation. He's connected me. He's a mentor. I value him so much. And my next producer of my next project, she's an Anglo woman. Right? And so we can work in teams now. When I get the green light for my next film, as I've done for all my previous films, I'm giving opportunities to Latinos, to people of color of all kinds. And I don't feel like I need to just work in one little silo. Right? I think we're much weaker that way.
Maria, you mentioned something really important, mentorship. How would some of our guests here in the audience that are interested in having a mentor in the film industry, how would they go about that? This is actually for anybody.
Yeah, I think in the film industry, I think it's really important to join the major organizations, right? And you've got, if you're a documentarian, I don't know why you're not a member of IDA. I don't know why, you got to know which the major organizations are in your field, and you begin to go to those events and go to the conferences and invest in yourself, because those conferences can get expensive. You're shelling out a few $1,000s when you have to fly somewhere and pay for a hotel, etc. So you find a way to do it, partner up with people, and you go not with an agenda of like, yes, you know what you want to accomplish eventually, but you go to look for your tribe and to look for your people that are good, that are doing good work with honesty and integrity. Those are the ones that you're going to want to work with. And basically every film is made by a team, right? So you need to find that. I will say that I've gotten more commissions and work from my colleagues than from greenlighters, right? My colleagues recommend, right? The people I've come up with, the people I've helped and who have helped me. So that's the kind of thing that I've always found very helpful.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of just asking. If I see somebody, I'm like, oh, that person is dope. I want to talk to them. I want to learn. I just go up and be like, listen, I think that you're amazing, and I have questions. And do you mind? And we just have 20 minutes. You know what I mean? And I also think it's important that we recognize the mentors that we have around us, because I learned so much from my friends who I work with, like so much. And I think that we oftentimes are too attached to our mentors, or even what success looks like. I think it's really important for us to be able to open our eyes and open our hearts and our minds to be able to see something else. You know, like if you want to, right? One of my teachers used to tell me, you get to ask for something, and then you get to be quiet and not get to dictate how it shows up. Right? So if you want a mentor, then be like, I need a mentor, and I'm going to create that, and you put it out. I mean, we don't have to get all woo-woo, because you know I do that too. But then you just put it out, and then you keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open. Not like, I'm going to keep my eyes open for someone who looks like this and has this much money and does this kind of work, but I'm going to keep my eyes open for the person who has this kind of information that I'm looking for, and even for the information I don't even know that I need to have.
Right. Now, and I also really think that it's about just learning how to build a relationship, because I remember the first time I asked somebody to be a mentor. She was a really, heavy-hitting agent. Went up to her at a panel and said, can I get a mentor? Would you like to mentor me? She said, no, I don't have time right now. With an attitude, and it just completely turned me off. And I know that I approached it the wrong way. I was a lot younger and I learned my lessons. But I think it's, like you said, looking around the people around you. I mean, I have friends that I can just pick up the phone and call. And also, I think it's important to approach mentors or just any relationships with, like you said, not just what's in it for me, but I always try to do something for somebody else first. Like, how can you help them? Not how can they help you? Because eventually, all of our friends, like your friends want to work with your friends. Yeah. So it's just about building that relationship.
I mean, everything is about relationships. Like, life is about relationships. If you don't know how to cultivate and sustain real, meaningful relationships, you can just forget it. Number one, especially in business, forget it. Just forget about it. The other way is to be excellent. Because I've had a lot of people come to me and be like, I think that what you're doing is dope. I want to help you. I see you need help. I want to help you. So if you're doing something meaningful, you're doing something amazing, then people like we want, like this. I want what you want. You know what I mean? Like, I want what you want. So if you're doing something dope, I want to help you.
And I think finally, our last question is, how do you guys go about finding funding for your project? Because I know that's a big barrier for a lot of us, content creators. Like, how would you go about getting that money? And maybe methods of distribution. And this is actually for all of you. I'd like to just hear.
Yeah, for the digital space, we went crowdfunding for the various projects that I've worked on. And then after you've kind of built a brand or presence as a series, we were able to then license the series to other platforms. That's what I was saying, like, be thinking ahead about all the different types of platforms you can explore a piece of content on, because then I was able to, repurpose, even though it was like on our YouTube channel or, in another space, I was able to then say, hey, here's this other international distributor who's interested in licensing the content. They'll help us actually fund the second season. So we started kind of building off and developing those type of relationships. And actually, that's been helpful. But really, crowdfunding, self-funding. I mean, just keep the budget small. Work with friends. A lot of folks, they start from nothing, and you kind of just have to kind of take those steps sometimes.
I'm often commissioned. That's one way. I'm commissioned to make things. PBS has been oftentimes also Discovery, things like that. And then sometimes when it's an indie project that I want, I go after the money, and that might be anything from National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for Humanities. The series that's opening this year, Tigers Latina, is a transmedia project and a PBS series, and it's opening this year. And that was National Science Foundation money because it's STEM funding. And the next project that I'm doing is investors' money. So all different kinds of places, and it depends on the story, right? And how much you need. I make big projects that cost a lot of money, and so I can't just crowdfund it, but I could crowdfund part of it, maybe the beginning or part of the campaign, right? So it just depends what you're trying to do.
I think this is a tricky conversation because I never want a creative to not do something because of money. That hurts my feelings real bad. And so, I'm lucky enough to have people on my team who, are really good at that, and really good at building relationships, and really good at fundraising. And so, I'm not going to sit here and be like, I can raise whatever money. I'm not going to say that. And I know that I'm lucky to have that. And I know it took me a long time to get that. And so, how I used to do it, I would just roll with people who were down. It would just get it done. You know what I mean? But again, it goes back to that relationship thing and being excellent. Like, do good work. Do good work that people are going to believe in and want to fund, and make sure that you, everybody you meet, you need to know who you are. And you need to know how to stay in touch and know how to let them know what you're doing and know how to see them again and again and again. Because that's where your money is going to come from. That's where it's going to come from.
Well, on that note, do we have time for Q&A? Or? Okay. Any questions?
So, Maria, you talked about the demographics, right? The demographics. So I work in the tech industry, and every tech company has a huge pool of data scientists. Because if they're going to go out after money, or if they're going to launch a product, they have their data down to a science. There's a room full of data scientists. So when you talk about the demographics of 25% of our, Hispanic Latino community or community of color are the consumers, how do we connect that? How do we connect STEM and, some kids that are in data science that want to go into that? Because that's what's going to drive those numbers, are going to drive the sponsors and funding for your projects.
If you look, for instance, some very smart media companies like Disney, for instance, have been on this. They're heavy into that research, and they're on it. They understand they need to be pursuing the Latino market. So oftentimes you see it in these. Oftentimes you see it in the very, very established companies. So Disney has been doing it. Universal, NBC Universal, Paramount, the big studios are already onto this. This is not news. What's different is when you look at the greenlighting process, right? The greenlighting process is not a data-driven greenlighting process. There's a little bit of that that's happening in new media. Amazon looking at data, Netflix looking at data a little bit differently, right? But the old school greenlighting process is, I'm a dude, I golf with him, this feels on a gut level like a story I want to watch. 12 million to you, 100 million to you. So it's not necessarily just data driven, right? And then you see people of color making indie films, 1 million, 2 million or less. Why? Because we are not necessarily getting those greenlighters yet to say yes, but when you have a smaller budget, relatively smaller budget, what was the hidden figures? Maybe 29 million, 25 million, right? So you see a smaller budget film do very well, then it's teaching the industry, right? There's already the studies. The Ralph Bunche Center does these incredible studies, Dr. Darnell Hunt, and they're seeing $100 million spread between films that are more than 30% people of color, and films that are less than 10% people of color. So they did a study between 2012 and 2015, looked at hundreds of films, and saw if you're less than 10% people of color, the average was around 60 million. More than 30% average was around 160 million. I might be botching the numbers a little bit, but there is that $100 million spread. So the data's out there. What's not there is a system for us to get in, right? So it is us looking for ways to, no matter what the barriers, begin to create that content. But once you create the content, it's such a crowded marketplace, right? You make a web series, you and your mom might watch it unless you know how to market. So what she was saying is incredibly important. Understanding how does the industry work and how do you get past the gatekeepers or partner with savvy friends who can help you have a splash, right? But the interest is there. For instance, my last film, Rebel, PBS put the first picture of Loretta Velasquez on there. Within 2 hours, we had 4,000 shares. Not likes, shares. That's people spreading it because people are hungry for our stories, right? We had 29 million impressions with no marketing budget. It was all guerrilla. It was all what people were interested in. We ended up being seen at the White House. We were featured in a panelist for NCLR. People were talking about, the National Council of La Raza. It got out there. We made a big splash. This little tiny film about a Latina, a weird little story, and people, there's a new book attacking her still as a prostitute and as a liar, right? So people don't want to hear these stories. There's a lot of vested interest in not hearing about a Latina that was part of the Civil War, right? Because how could she enter that last boundary, which is what men and warriors and so forth. Remember, only a few years ago when Latinas, women, were actually allowed to formally fight in battle. Right? So every time we break those boundaries, people are going to push against it. And then when you say, do it anyway, right?
I'm really happy that you said that because I think that it's one thing to talk about the numbers because I have this big thing about because I have an organizing brain and an entertainment brain, and the way if you're doing grassroots electoral organizing and where somebody lives, how many times they go, who they what they ate for breakfast. So of course we have data to be able to do this, but what we often don't name is that we live in a world that's driven by white privilege and white supremacy. And that's just what it is, right? And so I started my company because I was like, I want to do this stuff and won't nobody let me do it. So I'm going to do it over here with me and my folks. And if other people start to like it, then that's awesome. And then everyone will get to hear it and we can all love each other.
Singing Yauri songs.
But I think that those are words that we are too afraid to say. Like, people do not want to say imperialism. People do not want to say white supremacy. People do not want to, and I think that we have to, because if we're not talking about what it is, then we're not going to be able to heal it and get past it. And I woo, okay. Y'all like to get me riled up in here. But I think that there's also part of the responsibility that we have is not only to be able to name those things, but also to be open-hearted and willing to love in the face and in the context of white supremacy and imperialism and colonialism. Because the only way that we're going to heal this and rise above is through love. And unfortunately, oftentimes you have to love first. Yeah. And you have to be open first, and you have to be willing first. And that is about learning how to be authentic, learning how to be clear about who you are, and learning how to be vulnerable. We in order for us to accomplish our professional goals, we have to develop some real human skills around loving and vulnerability. Because you got to be able to walk in a room and have somebody tell you no because you don't look like them, and know that that's just what they do. That's what their mom and daddy did. They rear pappy did it, and they just know what everybody told them to do. And not to excuse it, but we have to have a different skill set in order to be able to thrive in a space and to be able to persevere and tell our stories. Because that's what this is really about. It's like your story deserves to be told. You know what I mean? And there is nothing more transformative than to be able to tell your story. There's nothing like being silenced your whole life and then for the first time being like, hi, I'm Anasa, I have something to tell you. Right? Whether the person listens or not. Because stories storytelling isn't always about listening. Sometimes it's just about the catharsis that comes into being able to speak and be honest about who you are and to be unabashed about who you are. And then when you do that, that's when people listen. Because there's nothing more powerful than hearing an authentic story. So I don't know what my point is, but I just think it's important. Like when you're talking about the numbers, I mean, it don't work like that out here. You know what I mean? It don't work like that. It's not work like that. The numbers are awesome, but we have to have courage to tell our own stories and get it done no matter what. Is the point? That's my point. Tell your story. That's my point.
A great note to end on. Tell your story. And, I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen Tangerine, but that movie was shot with an iPhone, so there's no excuses. Just get it done. So thank you to all of our amazing panelists and our great audience, and hopefully this interaction with our great Black House. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. On behalf of Latino Reel and our sponsors, I'm going to walk away from that. I'd like to thank you for being here. That ends our programming for today. But we have a multicultural reception coming up at 5:30 to 8.
Hey, welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I can't even begin to tell you what a time I had out at Sundance. What an amazing experience and opportunity that I got to be able to go to Park City, Utah, be able to participate. We launched She Stories, as I mentioned at the top of the show. The vocal minority was able to make a lot of new contacts, and we're going to have tons more to come. Really appreciative of Latino Reel, the sponsors behind the panel you just heard. Also our partners, the Black House, Latina Magazine, Anna Marie Films, Califia Farms, Vox Creative, and SheLectricity, and of course, Eloveate. So stay tuned with us. Really appreciate you guys sticking around. 2017 is going to be crazy. The Vocal Minority Report. We booked so many new guests. We have so many things on the horizon. There's still that crazy orange Dorito man in the office who's really, really messing stuff up. We've got to rage against that. Really need you guys' support. Really appreciate your support. Make sure you go to thevocalminorityReport.com. Cop a shirt. You can support us. We're going to have our Patreon up and running. Kick in a few shekels. Holla at us. Go to iTunes. Leave a review. Leave a rating and review. We'll send you a free t-shirt. Make sure you tell everybody. You have to like and subscribe to the page. Ask everybody to do the same. We're going to grow this thing. It's going to be a banner year, 2017. We're elevating. Thanks, everyone, for staying with us. We'll talk to you next episode. All power to the people. Peace.
This has been a Vocal Neighbors production.